Okay, I'm going to call this meeting for January 29, 2024 of the Select Board. Could you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to get right into a presentation from Mr. Bill Gillette about a street clock for Vinyl Square.
Thank you. Bill Gillette, 5 Sharon Ave, North Chelmsford, Precinct 1 Town Meeting Rep, and a member of the Vinyl Square Strategic Action Planning Committee. First off, I just want to say thank you. I know that I've talked to a few of you informally about this, and it is my fault for not bringing this more formally to you in a more expeditious time frame. So thanks for having me up here. I'm only going to stay on the one slide that has the bullets, but please feel free. You can look at the pictures. They kind of tell 1,000 words. I come before you to talk about a clock tower. We've done some great things for the North Chelmsford area with Varney Park, with CCC. We're really focused on, the Ledge Road, and thank you for all of your help, but we haven't necessarily done a lot of improvements to the square itself. We have some bushes. We have, I think, 3 banners from the parade committee, but we just could use some revitalization. And I came upon one of these clocks, and I said, boy, what a wonderful thing it would be to put this in Vinyl Square. I wound up talking to a couple of what I'll call the old timers in Vinyl Square, and they said, gee, you know what, I'd love to see it, and I'd love to put some money towards it. It would just kind of fit in with the whole thing. So we talked to a company called the Verdon Company, and they're out of Connecticut. They happen to be on a clock. I was playing golf in Florida, and it's how I found them. They've been around since the 1800s. They came up. Christine Clancy and I first met with them. Joe Tierney, who's the chair of VSPAC, met with Lisa Maroney in the company the second time. They talked about estimates. They talked about where it might be. So the estimate itself would be, over $30,000. What I tell you is that includes chimes, which are a nice to have. And it doesn't include some of the things like installation, which, as we talked to Christine, I think the DPW would prefer to do the installation versus the company itself, but I don't want to speak exactly for her. The way that I think that we would fund this is predominantly through private funding. As I said, I talked to some people. They seem, excited about it. I will seek, some CPC funds. If there are funds that you can think of, I'm certainly open to that. I have talked to Representative Elliott. I am not confident that there would be anything from the state, but he said that, we'll work through it. And look, it would be something where I think you'd have to get 2/3 of the funding before I'd feel comfortable to order it. It's a 4 or 5 month lead time. I wouldn't feel comfortable unless we had a, light at the end of the tunnel of funding the whole thing. And as far as the funding goes, I think you'd probably do it in a tiered way. You'd have platinum and gold and, kind of silver, and allow people to want to take part in something like that. So probably the biggest question that we have all talked about, at least as a committee, because the VSPAC committee did vote on it and they were all in favor of it, would be the location. In the short term, it would probably go over where the municipal parking lot sign is in the Welcome to North Chelmsford. In the long term, with the way the traffic improvement flow would be, that may get moved to one of those islands. And we did, when we were with Christine and the clock company, we did talk to them and say, how big is that? And they said, no, it's not that much to move it. It's not a big reconstruction. So we have no idea when that will happen anyway. So we decided that we would forge forward and talk about this. So really, I wanted to just give a quick, informative, overview to all of you, and more ask for your permission to kind of formally move forward with a focus group That focus group would include Vinyl Square Strategic Action Planning Committee members, some people from the public in North Chelmsford, and then continue to work with Lisa, with Christine, et cetera. And I guess at some point we would come back in front of you when we had that fundraising and had some of the finer details on where it would be and present back to you at that point. But I promise I keep it short, so that's it, and I'll get some questions.
On each side.
So the dimensions would be 12 feet high,
The face, like how wide would each?
24 inches in diameter. So if you look at a couple of the pictures, George, there's two in downtown Lowell on Main Street,
Yeah.
and then that other one happens to be at Mount Pleasant, if that helps you.
I've seen them on golf courses and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
that's the first one that I saw. But I didn't want to put that picture in the proposal.
So Bill, I have a couple questions.
Please,
How
please.
is it powered?
It's actually would be through the electricity. There's some in that location as there is now, so you would have to run electrical there because you'd have the chimes and things like that.
And there would be a meter on it? How would
I
that work?
don't know, Pat, if there'd actually be a meter on it. I'm not sure.
Okay. And how would you recognize the people who donate for it?
So what the company suggested, there are 4 sides to the base, and that what they've seen is you do something like platinum, gold, silver, bronze for people that would be at different levels of donation and put their names on a plaque.
Okay. Any other questions?
Not a question, but just a comment. I didn't realize it could potentially have chimes. So one of the things this committee might want to just look at is how loud and often are they? Because there's people that live in that area. So I think the last thing we would want is people complaining that there's a clock going off in the middle of the night, or if there's any control over.
I don't want to speak out of turn. I think Joe was there the last time, but there's a remote control that they included with it so that when you had the lighting, you could use them. Do you want to give a little bit more on that?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Joe Tierney, 3 Grant Street, the chair of Vinyl Square, and thanks, Billy, for doing all this legwork and the support we've already had. I was at one of the meetings, and Christine and Lisa was there with the vendor, and they did talk about just that. And we were concerned about also not overlapping with the church chimes, and the like, so we can adjust to that. And there's, like Bill said, there's a remote control and volume, so we definitely want to make sure it's very, adhering to the neighborhood. And then obviously not going through the middle of the night. Unless, there's a party and it's a good week for doing that. I don't know, we can change the music and
Well, they probably couldn't hear it
we
anyway
can
if
take
there's a party
requests.
going
There's
on.
the playlist is pretty long. But we'll come back to the committee and let you know. Thank you.
And one more question. Is the clock face illuminated?
It is.
Okay.
And you could have done a 2-sided clock or a 4, and we went with the 4. We thought that it would stand out.
Okay.
The picture that is in there is not what it would look like. I do think that the team tried to do their best. It wouldn't be hanging over the curb and stuff like that. There's actually a pretty good rendition.
Yeah, that does look kind of, yeah.
Yeah, no, that was not it.
Paul, from a committee standpoint, you would advertise the committee and then they would be the appointing authority, or?
Yeah, they could just be an informal,
Well,
group.
do you need to advertise to the residents that there's a committee and they can apply, or?
I mean, I guess if it's a subcommittee of the Vinyl Square Strategic Action Plan Committee, they could promote it out there, and then they could be appointed as a subcommittee. If it's more of a working group, I don't quite know how.
It's just I see you called it a focus group.
Yeah, it's a focus
Okay.
group. Yeah, I don't know that they'd be.
So that could be more informally appointed.
Yeah, because I don't think it's going to be a long duration
Right.
committee. It's just more if they want to touch bases with folks.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much, and we'll look forward to hear about how it progresses.
Thank you. One last thing to add to that is that we're actually about to post our next meeting. In fact, I'll send an email to all those involved that normally attend, is that we're looking for next week, anything from Monday through, but it looks like maybe Monday. I don't know if there's any conflict, but I'll follow up with the email about setting the agenda and getting our follow-up meeting with this and other items for Vinyl Square. And again, we just want to make sure the temporary placement is pretty good and working with Christine, like Bill had said, and we'll take the next steps pretty shortly. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, next item, Paul, I think you wanted to talk about this letter that the Attorney General sent.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to put it on the screen. As you may recall, there was a recent discussion regarding the MBTA zoning act and ballot question and so forth. And since that time, this letter was issued by the Attorney General, Andrea Joy Campbell, in response to the situation that's now ongoing in the town of Milton, where the town meeting passed a bylaw for compliance with MBTA zoning, and now it's subject to initiative petition process. And again, it's a 2+ page letter, so I'm not going to read it verbatim, but I think I can just sort of highlight a couple matters that she writes. And the Attorney General, and I'll just quote, you go to the sort of the top of the second page, because a lot of it's introductory. In the last sentence of that top paragraph, it says, "But the law is crystal clear as to whether municipalities must comply, they must." You get down to 2 further paragraphs down. "As the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities," which is EOHLC, has expressed clearly to the town, Milton's eligibility for a wide variety of state funding will be impacted if the town rejects compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. She then goes on, the next paragraph, at the end of the next paragraph, "As a matter of state law, compliance with the act is not optional, as we have clearly and consistently advised. My office will not hesitate to compel compliance with the MBTA Communities Act through legal action if necessary, should a municipality refuse to comply. We are empowered to enforce state and local fair housing laws which prohibit municipalities from maintaining zoning rules that impermissibly restrict housing opportunities for protected groups, including families with children, should the facts indicate a violation of those laws have occurred." And then she concludes, her concluding sentence of her letter, "Should the town chart a course of contravention of state law, however, the Attorney General's office will carry out its responsibilities to enforce the law without hesitation." So again, I just hope that provides, we've had correspondence from guidance from council, and again, this came subsequent to that, so I wanted to bring that formally to the board's attention and to the community's attention.
Anybody have any comments, questions about that?
No.
Okay. Okay, next thing on our agenda was prompted from our license that we issued last Monday. George, I did this for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems in the past year or so that we have waived our policy about holding over license approvals to the next, to two meetings, basically. More often than we have waived it more often than we have enforced it. So I thought it's time to then remove this requirement from our policies. It does not remove the option that we have, that we can continue a hearing on anything. I mean, we've done that for car dealers or poll petitions. So we always have that option to do that. But this just removes it from our policies. I don't know if anybody has any questions or concerns about it.
It just removes it as a necessity.
Correct.
Right.
As a requirement, yeah. We'll call it the George Dixon Amendment.
Yeah. The name something after me.
I think it makes sense, because discretion is usually for the exception, and the exception has typically been that we extend it.
Makes sense to
I
me.
mean, people are well-known and, they
Yeah.
have plenty of experience and everything like that. I don't see any reason.
I don't think there's any other policy in town on public hearings to just
Automatically
extend
yeah.
either. So I think this is consistent with how,
But I do think it's good to have an option also.
Yeah.
Well, we always have the option.
Yeah. To have it
So
written.
it is our policy on policies to continue that until our next meeting, to
Okay.
accept it. So at our next meeting, I'll take out the changes and show how it would actually read without the crossouts and the additions. Okay, so now we're on to the highlight of the evening.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. The reason that we have this third and special meeting in the month of January pertains to the town's charter and bylaws regarding the presentation of the proposed operating budget. As I noted in my slide, the town charter and bylaw, they require that manager to issue a proposed budget 90 days prior to the commencement of town meeting. Town meeting this year is April 29th. We're there. We're 3 months in advance. And at this point in time, the information that was sort of late arriving, as we anticipate is the case, was the Governor Healy's release of the proposed state budget, because, again, under the state's rules and operating procedures, she has to release the budget by the third Wednesday in January during a non-election year, which is what this year is. So basically, that being the most available information that we have regarding local aid to the community in terms of local aid receipts from the state as well as our assessments from the state, that's the information that we use in the budget. As we know, under the legislature's calendar, the House will take up the budget and is scheduled to and usually does enact a budget by the end of April, when at that point we're at town meeting, literally. And then at the end of May, the Senate completes action on its budget. And then it's usually, though ideally they're supposed to have a budget in place by the start of the fiscal year on July 1, we've seen time and time again that it goes to the end of July at the earliest. And where this being an election year, they probably will finish the budget sometime at the end of July if one were prognosticating. But basically, we have the best information that we have at this point. And that's what we utilize in the budget. And basically, the local aid directives from the state came last Thursday. Even though the governor announced the budget 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the local aid numbers came at about 11:30 on Thursday morning, and then they were slightly revised about 5:30 on that evening. And so the finance director, John Souza, and I sort of gathered the most information. We had previously met with department heads, and then sort of pulled it together because we have to have a balanced budget. And then basically, upon the completion of that, we then produced the narrative and sent that out. And later this evening, John's going to present the capital component of the budget, and I'll focus here at the beginning on the operating portion. You may recall this process started back in December with the tri-board meeting between the Select Board, Finance Committee, and School Committee, where we discussed information we had at that time and our, crystal ball to the future. The vote at that meeting was to use the full levy capacity of the town, and so that's what this budget does. So based on the information that we have, the proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year is $162.6 million. It does utilize the entire roughly $125 million estimated property tax levy capacity. Again, we utilize the governor's proposed state aid numbers, which sadly on the revenue side only provides a 1.87% increase in local aid revenue from the state. And then if you net it out with our assessment, we're only about 1.68% of an increase, net increase of local aid. And I guess as I'm sort of harping on the fact that that's a low number, I can tell you that there are communities, including neighboring communities of Westford, where their net local aid was negative. And you say, well, how can that be? You get Chapter 70 funding, and you also obtain lottery aid and so forth. Well, what also goes into the calculus is you also get assessments from the state. Most notably, those are educational assessments for students attending charter schools and school choice. You also get mosquito control district assessments and so forth. So again, that's the whole picture of local aid. So And so that's the reality, and that's the numbers that we use. Our local receipts, we've looked at the most up-to-date numbers, including the motor vehicle excise assessment that is going to go out in the next couple of weeks. Many of you who've owned a car for some time know that the annual motor vehicle assessment for people who've owned the same vehicle for the prior year goes out at the end of January, early February. We have that file. We've utilized that data. Again, we've talked to the building inspector and seen what's going on in his office and so forth. So we provided our best estimates on local receipts. And then there are other miscellaneous available funds, such as the revenue we see for payment in lieu of taxes, or the money that comes in from enterprise funds and so forth for benefits and so forth that affect the budget. So again, that's all factored in. The big thing to note, and I want to talk about this, is if people have been reading and following the media, this is a very challenging budget period. Many have read the state's challenge that they had to reduce the revenue estimates for the current year, and they have a very modest estimate of 2% increase in the state revenue for the upcoming year. We've also seen the local level. There was a story in the Lowell Sun on Sunday about the Dracut Police Department concerns about cuts because the town of Dracut is looking at a very difficult financial situation. We've also seen town of Westford, they're out exploring, a hiring freeze for non-essential employees. They're also looking at a override at the ballot in the next couple of months. And Chelmsford's not immune to that. And so when we prepare this budget, we look at what our available revenues are, what our resources are, and then we make decisions in terms not only of the next 12 months, but long-term, because you don't want to be, we don't want to be, jerking back and forth in terms of making enhancements and then making cutbacks and so forth. And we understand that every situation is unique. And what was unique to Chelmsford for the current fiscal year, and that's the purpose of the slide, is we received an extraordinary, unexpected, however long sought for adjustment in our Chapter 70 educational funding of over 18%, or over almost $2.2 million. That information came in in that budget process, but what we didn't do was alter our philosophy of how we fund, our operations, and again, using that long-term approach. So again, we have sort of been steady. We have funded the schools well above minimum net school spending. So therefore, when the extra Chapter 70 money came in, unlike some other towns where it forced them to increase their educational spending, we were above net school spending. We maintained, meaning us, the school department and superintendent and others, and us as a community, maintained that, I guess, level-headedness in terms of how do we fund going forward. And, just like this board did and the community did with the ARPA funding and other monies that come in that are sort of unanticipated and so forth. And so, and then we saw that come out. This year, as you can see, the Chapter 70 educational increase was less than 2%, 1.9%, or just over $269,000. So what that means is we've sort of been adjusted under the education funding law, which is the Student Opportunities Act, now in the fourth year of a 7-year law. And you can see that our funding levels, which the governor fully complied with, really go back to what we've seen as historic funding levels. So you obviously, when you look at it, over a decade, you can see you're getting around 2%, 1.5%, 2%, and all of a sudden the anomaly, and then now we're sort of back into a more traditional increased funding level. So that's sort of how we move forward. What we look as we look out in the horizon is
Paul?
concern. Yes.
So the 1.9% is based on the 14.1 million.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what you're saying is we got an 18% increase in
2024.
Huh?
But yes, for the current fiscal year.
But
Yep.
we didn't act like we can increase everything 18%.
No, so what we ended up doing is we ended up funding one-time expenditures.
Right.
Most notably were contract settlements. So we had retroactive contract settlements that went back over multiple fiscal years. So therefore, what that meant was the levy was used, meaning we had the capacity to do it.
Right.
But when it came to then moving the budget going forward, that provided the revenue cushion to absorb the traditional, normal annual increases in our operations.
So it appears we're going back to the 1 to 2% pattern, but they're
Yeah.
not taking away the,
No,
they're
so-
basing it on the,
So right now, for example, you saw the funding level in fiscal '23
Yeah.
was almost 12 million, went to 14 million, and now it's, 14.1 million, now it's 14.4. So nothing was taken away. What
Okay.
you saw was an anomaly with the increase, and then now you're back at certain levels. And so that was how we go forward. So again, if one were to anticipate going into '26, meaning next year, or '27, a couple of years, you're probably going to have funding levels more around 269,000 or less, because we just, we're sort of been adjusted by the Student Education Act. And what drove that 269, which is 1.9% above a little bit of what we had seen in going back 5 or 10 years, was the enrollment growth in the district. What happened to Chelmsford, and we see this at Neshoba Tech and in Chelmsford, is our student enrollment is growing, and therefore with that growth does come some additional Chapter 70 funding. So instead of it being 1.4% or 1.38 or 1.37, what you saw sort of going back 6 years or so ago, it's now upticked to 1.9. So again, that's not an avalanche coming of enrollment growth coming at us. But so I think as you look forward to the future, as we're sitting here next December, starting the process again for FY26, we're going to use a number like 270,000 or something for Chapter 70 growth. What we didn't know at that time was, where were we going to land after we came down off of the 2.18? And in my conversations with Dr. Lang and the resources he was trying to reach out to, this was a disappointment to him. And again, the certainty comes out with the budget that comes out. And same thing, we have no, if you look at the cherry sheets from the local aid numbers, we don't know in advance what the charter school assessments are going to be, what the school choice assessments are going to be, or even, the components of that. So those are the critical numbers, which is why it's so critical to have the governor's budget before we come out with anything. Unfortunately, it creates a narrow window to do it, but it's very helpful. Otherwise, you're just speculating. And, so this is the best information we have. We now, as I said earlier, we now won't get any further information from the state in terms of updates till April. So again, this is the best that we have to go with. So then moving forward on that, my concern is, and again, I keep harping on this, that anomaly avoid us having to make further cuts for the current year. My concern, barring the unforeseen, is that it will be tight, and there may have to be some adjustments a year from now or two. The only anomaly that we see in the community, quite frankly, and we don't know the pace of it, will be the development of the UMass West Campus, because that's 400 housing units. It's a market rate units, of which 6 are affordable. The pace of that will help the town with the property tax levy going forward, because it'll provide new growth. The challenge with that is the timing. For example, the new growth in this budget that's being produced right now goes till June 30th, so it's roughly 5 months from now. Well, we know 5 months from now, the only thing that's likely to be on the West Campus is going to be some roadway work and maybe some foundations, so we're not going to capture anything. We also know by the information from the developer that even though they applied for all the building permits in order to get under the existing energy code, that this is going to be built in multiple years in phases. We just don't know what the growth of those phases may be in the future, and I think part of that will depend upon the market. and how they're able to sell units and so forth. That will help us in terms of trying to sustain the operations and services of the town going forward. That's the only anomaly that's really out there that we can recognize at this point. So that's what we have. And again, when we gather, in the future, we'll provide updated information as we can. But it is a concern because, you always got to be keeping an eye on the present, but always looking towards the future. In terms of the budget highlights, here's a summary of what the budget provides. The funding for the Chelmsford Public Schools increases by 4.5%. The funding for Neshoba Tech, my estimate, and the numbers, I guess, are going to be voted tomorrow night at Neshoba Tech and presented at the budget breakfast on Thursday, is I rounded the estimate to $240K, $4.1 million. We'll see how close that is, but my guess is it's a good landing spot based on the conversations I've had with the superintendent. Right now, the latest information we have on health insurance premium increases is 6%, so that's $1 million of increases to the operating budget. We know our Middlesex County retirement assessment increased at 6.5%, or almost $740,000. And then we've provided funding for the final year of the current collective bargaining agreements that are in our contract, so that's known going into the upcoming fiscal year, and we have the non-union compensation plan in there. And then I provided funding, as I indicated last meeting, for the operations of the Chelmsford Center for the Arts, because at the end of this fiscal year, the ARPA funding will be exhausted, as would and the state funding has already been exhausted. So that basically goes away for in the future. So that's what I've done. And again, it's the level of funding for the Center for the Arts is not at the suggested level. It's what I sat down with the finance director, the town accountant, and the executive director for the Center for the Arts, and I think we arrived at a number that we think is reasonable in terms of what we believe to be the operations of the new director, based on her almost year experience now as the director of the facility, as well as looking back over the historic activities of the Center for the Arts over the 3 directors that have existed out there.
Paul?
Yeah.
So just a thought, the CCA's kind of been a topic for the last 3 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're at a point where we know that it's only going to be sustainable at a certain level, you might want to think about whether it's appropriate for town meeting just to expand a little bit on what that analysis is, since this is going to be a recurring theme, because we basically want town meeting to buy into that. It's really, and then just the other thing I'll just mention for the board, I mentioned to Paul, we have the strategic plan that was developed before COVID, and then COVID hit for the CCA, and if the number's $200K a year, I don't remember what the number is, there's still a couple things there that we could look at to see if it can be less than that in the out years, and we've had fresh leadership and changes in leadership in the CCA, in the advisory council, as well as in the Friends of the CCA and how they've restructured. And so it might be time to just kind of get those heads together again and see what else we can do to support Lauren.
Yeah, and I in fact, I met this morning with the chair of the advisory committee and the vice chair of the CCA advisory committee, talking about that. And then now that Lauren's sort of been in place for a year, I think we need the place where we need either quarterly or every 4 months sort of status reports, financial plans, and so forth. So because it is essential going forward. The other thing I wanted to take time on is things that aren't in the budget. I mean, when John and I sort of met with department heads, we asked for level service budgets. However, they always bring forth reasonable requests for their operations, and we even heard some of those going back in December when Dr. Lang presented what he saw as a macro level for the school operations. And this budget does not have the targeted amount of funding that the school department has identified for additional teachers and support staff for the enrollment increases and identified student support needs. You'll see later on, it's about $320,000 under that request. I've eliminated the municipal safety specialist position that is now vacant, and I'll be working with the public works director and others to try to address the workforce safety operations in the general government and the schools. We are seeing increased compliance by the state in terms of workforce safety, in terms of on-site inspections and so forth, and it is real. In working with the police chief, there is a need for additional police officers to enhance traffic safety across the community. In working with the Fire Station Study Committee and the fire chief, there have been ongoing requests and needs for additional firefighters to increase apparatus staffing levels, and the creation of fire lieutenant positions to enhance operational safety. Back to DPW, there is a need for additional highway labor positions to improve the condition of the town's parks, roadways, and sidewalks. I think we've seen that as recently as the last week when the pothole calls come in and so forth, and then parks in the summer and then also there is a legitimate need, for example, for a benefits coordinator between human resources and the Treasury accounting operations to be tracking the benefits. We're approaching now almost 1,000 retirees in the town of Chelmsford. To put that in perspective, I think when John and I started almost 15 or so years ago, I think we were about 750 retirees. So we have a growing number of retirees. And then what you have to do is you need to coordinate, the payments and activity of benefits. And you can imagine there are others, that I didn't put on the list, but, Deb Sirianni has a need for additional maintenance at the senior center and so forth. So they're out there. The capital improvement requirements, the proposed budget funds, I hate using this because people do it, it funds capital improvement at the highest level in the town's history, but that's because, of inflation. But the bottom line is, in all seriousness, we bumped up the capital funding plan from $4.3 million to $5.8 million, which is a third of an increase. And it wasn't because we just fell in love with capital. The bottom line is we had over $11 million of capital requests, and I know you've heard this and it's been discussed. But the problem is they're legitimate requests, and as the town's buildings and infrastructure continues to age, it's a real compelling need. And then on top of that, you've got the inflation aspect with construction, and it's just creating a significant challenge. So the Capital Planning Committee came forward with a plan, which I have endorsed in its entirety, to step up the capital improvement investment. And it's real. And as you can see, the major investments there are replacement of a fire engine that now costs over $1 million to replace a fire engine, to redoing the ceiling tiles in the South Row School, to creating a secure entryway at the McCarthy Middle School. And again, John will go through this in greater detail. HVAC for the new Adams Library, which is now over a generation old, and it needs partial replacement. And next year, you'll see a further replacement of additional components of that system. Road improvements, construction, elevators at the senior center, the McCarthy School, and then boilers at the Westland School, and partial roof replacement of the first phase at the McCarthy School. That again, some of these are multi-year events. Some things that weren't there that people have been looking for, because they just didn't make the cut, but they weren't valid, is it does not fund the replacement of the McCarthy School tennis court area. That area has been closed. DPW has removed the materials from there, but there is no construction, because the schools had higher priorities on their list, and then it didn't meet all the other priorities of the town. The school committee came forth with a legitimate request to renovate the art rooms at the high school. That's going to wait and be deferred. There is a need to paint the exterior and do some repairs at the historic town hall in the center and the North Town Hall. Because believe it or not, it's been a while now since those buildings were renovated, and some of them have massive sun exposure, which really does a job on exterior, whether it's your house or in this case an historic building. And then one of the other items was the renovation of the restrooms in this building, which I think go back to quite some time when there were students in this building. And so the other big thing that's listed, as you see at the bottom paragraph, it didn't make it, and the reason we didn't fund it at this time, but we anticipate it coming at the fall, is we are going to be applying it, and I think Dr. Lang will be here at your next meeting after he appears before the school committee the first week of February, is to submit an accelerated repair program, which is technical gargle for, we're trying to seek 50% state reimbursement to replace a portion of the roof at the South Row School at an estimated project cost of $1.2 million. So that will be coming. Why it didn't make this year's capital is because the application period is in the spring. We won't hear about an award till the fall, and then really it wouldn't take place till next year. So it may be something that we might fund at fall town meeting or spring town meeting of '25, depending upon when the state award comes in. And then we also have, as the final paragraph notes, we're also be coming to town meeting this spring to request funding for a feasibility study for the replacement of the Parker Middle School. Dr. Lang is working on getting updated cost estimates for similar studies, but the latest numbers that I'm hearing are like borrowing $1.5 to $2 million to do that study, which won't commence until we're accepted, and whether we're accepted in next calendar year to the MSBA, but you have to have the vote by the end of this calendar year. So again, that won't hit the debt service for this year, but you have to have the vote taken this year. And as I mentioned at the previous meeting, the reason we want to take the vote this year is because we want to increase the community's awareness of this project. The good news on that is that feasibility study, if we are awarded and brought in, is 50% or so reimbursable, regardless of whether the town were to ultimately do the project or not. So in summary, as I say at the top of the slide, the proposed capital and operating budget isn't ideal. However, I believe it's responsible to maintain our essential operational and infrastructure needs and hoping to forestall future problems. I'm sure that if we, there's 165 town meeting reps, there would probably be 165 proposed operating budgets, and even if I pass it around the table, there'd probably be 5 different operating budgets for the town. But I think what I'm presenting and what we've done, reflects the priorities of the community and is in keeping with the interests of the town. So again, I'll go much quicker now that we're through the narrative. $162.6 million operating budget, which is about a 3.3% increase. As I mentioned, the school budget would be funded at $73.88 million, an increase of 4.5%, or just over roughly 3.2 million. The town's general government departments is $38 million, which is an increase of 1.3 million, or 3.5%. Neshoba Tech is a $4.1 million assessment, an increase of 240,000, or 6.23%. Benefits and insurance, again, another increase of over 6%, of 1.9 million to roughly almost $32 million for benefits and insurance. Obviously, behind the Chelmsford Public Schools, that's our largest budget number. And then our debt service declines by almost $500,000, or 4.45%, to 10.55 million. But most of that is excluded debt, which doesn't free up any capacity for us to fund anything, because that was debt for mostly the sewer projects that were allowed for the property tax levy only for that exclusive purpose, and then when it ends, it goes away. So we can't transfer that to other operations. Again, I'll try to be efficient. Again, just provides you the breakdown by various departments, and you can see that the budget line item changes by almost 3.94%, or 6.15 million, and then you can see the public safety one shows a negative number, and that's because, again, the current prior year's number was inflated because of the contract settlements. And what that really, that's why you got to take a long-term view, because if you then went back to the previous year, it would have been underrepresented because there weren't contracts settled. So that's why we put the numbers in to maintain consistency. Again, looking at your revenue summary, using our reasonable estimates for new growth, you see a property tax levy goes up not just by 2.5%, but by 3.44%. That's our biggest source of funding, 4.15 million out of the 5.06 million. You can see state aid was, as we talked about earlier, was less than 1, on the revenue side, less than 1.9%, at 395 million thousand. Local receipts 3.6%, 434, and then available funds 2%, almost 80,000. I tend to look over 5 and 10 years just to give some sense of trends, because people say, well, why do my taxes go up? Why does the budget go up? And part of it is you really have, we're a service provider. And like most municipalities, most of your expenses go to the schools. So if you look over 5 years, your schools have gone up by almost 13 million or 21%. Public safety is our next biggest component, 3.4 million, and DPW follows at 2.5 million. And then obviously your benefits and insurance. You can see that benefits and insurance are almost $7 million over the last 5 years. And as I mentioned earlier, our debt service has gone down. So, the money goes where the money is, which is where you're again, where we're a human service operation, we're government. We educate, we provide public safety and public works. That's where the money goes. And most of that is, personnel. And again, we look over it for 10 years, the school budget's grown by 45% in 10 years, or 23 million, and so forth. And again, benefits and insurance increased by 13 million over the last decade, or 71%. So again, my suggestion for the schools recommended budget is 73.88 million. This is sort of the funding increase history for the last decade for the schools. It would, if you look over the last 4 years, it would be the third lowest. And again, their costs are escalating because, again, most of their stuff is labor. You're building upon previous year's salaries and so forth. And unlike the other departments, the schools don't go to town meeting to fund their contracts. So the money is budgeted and is held till settlement. So those tend to be more representative, which is why it tends to be more of a linear increase. The other thing to note on the net school spending I was talking about earlier in terms of what happens with the requirement, the thing to note is, again, we're about a third above our net school spending requirement. Basically, the state says we have to spend, for the current fiscal year, 63.8 million in our schools. We're funding at 84.3 million, or 32% above the requirement. But the interesting to note is the required net school spending based on the governor's proposal, that increases by $3 million. So what the state is saying is, and that's why we're talking about the enrollment and other issues, the state is saying is that Chelmsford is required to spend $3 million of education funding for the upcoming year than we did the current year. Fortunately, we're not at that minimum, so it doesn't create heartburn, but there are communities that are at that level, and that's where you start feeling the squeeze, and that's why the issue becomes real sensitive. I think the town of Drake, it was one of those, you remember a year ago, is they got an influx of Chapter 70, but then their net school spending went up, and therefore it really didn't benefit the whole town. So again, that's, and as Dr. Lang noted, most communities are well above net school spending, but that's the law and the formula that's been in place since the 1990s, as amended with the Student Opportunities Act, which has a couple more years to go before it's adjusted again. Again, unfortunately, a lot of the data in the Department of Education website is not very current. We don't have data on per pupil expenditure beyond fiscal year 21. I mean, we're in 24. But at that time, for Chelmsford, it was over $17,000. So again, if it's costing us $18,000 this current fiscal year, and the math works out really, really evenly, if it costs you $18,000 per pupil, and you have 180 school days, it's basically the cost is $100 per school day per pupil. What does that mean for a classroom? That means it's costing you roughly $400,000 for fiscal year to educate a classroom of students, total all costs in, or $2,200 per day in a classroom. Again, looking at the enrollment growth, which is really what this chart does, you can see how the Chelmsford Public Schools, as you saw, it sort of peaked at FY20. Well, it was high at FY14 and it declined for several years. Peaked at FY20, took a nosedive during the pandemic, where they lost, almost 200 students, and now you see it coming back to the point now where, where our October 1st enrollment, which is where the state gets these figures, are up by 73 students from the prior year. So October 1 of 23 versus October 1 of '22, which goes forward to the subsequent fiscal years. So that's why Dr. Lang speaks of an enrollment growth, particularly at the elementary levels. But yet in the absolute, you're about where you were a decade ago, where it was FY14, it was 5,124 students. We're now at 5,181. Not to say that the students today aren't the same as they were a decade ago, because we know there are some more behavioral challenges and special ed challenges along the way.
When the enrollment dipped during COVID, there wasn't like a linear correlation to the budget
No, because
we didn't change the number of teachers and everything.
Right.
Okay.
yeah. And it was so sudden. I mean, that was the thing, is when it
Yeah.
hit in March, at that point, your fiscal year
You
was
didn't
done.
have time to prepare for
And,
it.
and nobody knew what the duration was going to be either. Again, the other slides, I'm not going to dwell upon them, but it basically shows that our enrollment and student-teacher ratio, a number of teachers, that falls within those communities that the state identifies as our peers. Same thing with class size. But again, this was the slide that Dr. Lang produced in December at the tri-board budget meeting. They're working on their budget now. It should be coming out in a couple of weeks. But you can see he identified $3.5 million of budget drivers, most of those being labor. Your cost of living adjustment on salary schedule, step increases, lane changes, retirement incentives. And then you've got your regular transportation, I'm okay. Special ed transportation, and then out-of-district special ed tuition, utilities, and again, he identified additional, thank you, teacher and support staff of $400,000. I can't make it, and so I fund basically $80,000 of the $400,000 request, and I think the school, honestly, and the reason I can sleep and put my head on the pillow and assure the community that things are going to be okay is because I think the school does have some resources, some of which were discussed at that tri-board meeting. They have school choice revenue. They do have a fund for special ed circuit breaker and so forth. So I think, it's time for them to, as their needs arise, to perhaps tap onto their available resources. In Neshoba Tech, I've estimated, as I said earlier, $4.1 million, $240,000 increase, and that's basically driven by enrollment. Our enrollment at Neshoba Tech increased by 6 students to 218. As we heard from Dr. Pigeon, in December, the district's total enrollment has increased by 40 students. Basically, they've phasing out. I think they got 1 year left of school choice students, and then it's gone, meaning we're bearing the entire cost, where before school choice was providing a subsidy to the district, much like the Chelmsford Public Schools brings in students because it's cost effective. That's all gone. So again, I'm estimating $4.1 million. And talking to Dr. Pigeon, basically she kind of gave me some assurances that you're in the ballpark. But again, the final votes haven't been taken. And you can just see the enrollment growth at Neshoba Tech, over the last decade, from 173 students to 218 as of October 1st of 2023, or 17%, or 32 students over the last 5 years. And again, we don't have more recent data on per pupil expenditure from the Department of Education, even though the communities report this stuff annually. But basically, I believe that this per pupil expenditure today roughly exceeds $22,500 to educate a child at the vocational school. Much like we saw, it's about probably $18,000 for the Chelmsford Public Schools. The reason a vocational school is more expensive is obviously it's only a high school population. You also have the supplies and services. Even in the Chelmsford Public School District, it costs more to educate kids at the high school than it would be at the elementary school. Again, her budget drive is very similar. Contractual increases for staff, lane and step changes, special education staffing, services, transportation, their building maintenance and capital, and then the cost of technical program and equipment and other vendors and fixed costs. On the police side, what we're seeing is, again, level staffing, call volume increasing. They responded to over 37,000 calls in the last calendar year. Again, roughly half of those are property checks during that period of time. Again, you can kind of do the math. It's roughly 100 calls per day. the 365 days into 37,000. And the same thing on the fire. We have level staffing for the fire department. Their calls have increased to over 6,363 now for the calendar year '23. And again, 2/3 of those are medical calls, over 4,000. So then moving on to then what drives the budget in the town side, very similar to the school and general government, we factor in literally almost zero-based budgeting. Each department comes in with their current staff changes and forecasted changes. The net increase was 295,000. Health insurance, as I noted earlier, an increase of premiums of 6%, which is better than the forecasted earlier numbers where it was closer to 10%. Early projections, and even the state's group insurance commission is over 9% increase. Again, as I noted earlier, increasing number of retirees, and again, we'll have our final rates in February, but again, my discussions with them, that's where we're at. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the chart, and John Souza tracks this and produced this chart for me, but as I mentioned earlier, 977 retirees at this time. Again, you go back a decade to 830 was the case. So you can just see the linear growth of employees, total subscribers, retirees over time. And obviously we know health insurance premiums are expensive. Our current share right now, the total annual HMO family plan is over $28,000. The town pays $21,000 or 75% of that. So if you look for the upcoming year, you add 6%, we're going to be paying $22,000 for a family HMO plan, the town's contribution. As I noted, the town's FY25 assessment to Middlesex County Retirement System is up over 6.5%, or $744,000 to $12 million. That they do every other year. They do the adjusted actuarial. This is the second year, so probably 6 months from now or so, we may have what it's going to be for the upcoming 2 years, but that's where we're at this point. A known number. And again, the sad part in all that is of that $12 million assessment, over $10 million of that is for the unfunded liability, which we're scheduled to pay off almost a dozen or so years from now, in 2037. Assuming everything goes well according to the actuarial projections, as well as the market returns on investments and so forth. And that's sort of, again, the sins of the unfunded liability from the past that we're still incurring and paying off. Solid waste and recycling, we have fixed contracts on that. Our collection costs are going up by just under 2%, or $46,000, and the disposal costs are going up by 2.5%. So there's $200,000 for solid waste collection and disposal. Property and casualty insurance, we many of us know what's happening to the property market in terms of the storm impacts. Part of the reason the property insurance market goes up is because the value of real estate goes up. So if you're insuring it and your homes are appreciating at a greater value, well, so isn't your insurance. And again, that's the market trend. And then obviously our workers' comp is tied to our growth in employee payroll. So there's, again, 4.8% of $53,000. Medicare taxes, basically it's a payroll tax. So that's going up by $65,000. Moving on to debt service, again, we as we noted previous meetings, we've upgraded our bond rating to AAA. Standard & Poor's noted our strong debt and liability profile with high debt service carrying costs, but somewhat offset by rapid amortization. Basically, it means that the town has debt that's going to be paid off in the near future. Of course, that will all go out the window once a school project is absorbed, or if funded, because that would be a 30-year, or as the governor suggested 2 weeks ago, perhaps a 40-year debt for schools. So as I mentioned earlier, our excluded debt is decreasing by over $500,000, $572,000, or by a third. Again, it doesn't provide any relief to the operating budget because it's targeted for the sewer debt that's being paid off. So you can see how rapidly that's fallen. I mean, you go back to FY18, it was $4.3 million for almost 4.4, and you can just see how it's just fallen off as we nearing the end of paying off of the excluded debt service on the sewer project. For non-excluded debt, again, this slightly increases because, again, we've raised our capital, we've raised our capital funding as also interest rates have gone up. because that's new debt that will be issued. So that goes up by 87,000 or 1.23%. Again, here's our full-time equivalent employees. And again, why you see the increase for this current year is we're adding the people for the Center for the Arts onto the operating budget. So that's why we go from 256 to 259. Plus, we added the funding for an inspector in the health department so that we can comply with the required number of inspections that are needed for all the dining establishments and such in the community. Again, I don't know what the school's projected and employees will be in their budget, but obviously in recent years and historically, the school growth of employees has increased greater than the town's, as you can see by the data that's provided. So there's your 5.9 million in budget drivers. The biggest one being the school department, as I mentioned earlier. Next biggest one being benefits, health insurance, and retirement assessments. Then employee compensation, Neshoba Tech, solid waste recycling, non-excluded debt service, Medicare, and property and casualty. So when you look on the revenue side, as I noted in the outset, most of that comes from the property tax. We're allowed almost $3 million in the allowed 2.5% increase in the levy. We're projecting 1.7 in new growth. We had 39,000 in excess levy capacity for the current year. That's the rounding of the penny on the tax rate. It's because you can go anywhere from 0 to 70,000 with the rounding of a penny, because you just don't know where you're going to land. Your state aid, as I mentioned, 395,000. Local receipts 434, and available funds is 80,000 to 5.6. And again, you can see that how the budget drivers are greater than the available revenue sources. Doing a comparison over time, showing you how the town's budget is funding, you can see that it's being pretty consistent. The property tax is funding more than 3/4 of the budget. In this case, just more than 76% of the budget. State aid is around 13%, local receipts under 8%, and available funds just over almost 2.5%. And then over that period of time, you can see our Chapter 70 funding has increased in 5 years by almost 30%. Again, the big boost last year, as we talked about earlier, and then general government aid is only roughly 16% over 5 fiscal years. And, so that's shows you that's mostly tracking inflation, because if you took 2.5% and compounded it over 5 years, you're roughly 13.14%. So you can see the general government aid is only following inflation and growth in the state budget at the outset, as opposed to the final state budget, which we know increases. 10 years, again, the data shows the same. Property tax increasing as a component, state aid slightly declining, local receipts slightly declining, and available funds slightly declining. And you can see the Chapter 70 funding and general government aid are roughly about 39%. Again, if you compounded 2.5% over 10 years, you'd be at roughly 28%. So that's what's happening in terms of state support. So again, diving deeper into the property tax revenue, the 1.7 million number is not overly conservative, based on discussions with the building commissioner and what we've seen historically. For the year that we're in right now, which means as of last June 30th, we only had 1.5 million in new growth. Go back 2 years, it was 1.7. Go back year prior to that, it was 1.5, and go back year prior to that, 4 years ago, was 1.78. So again, I think the 1.7 is a realistic number, not an overly conservative number, because we don't have the luxury of being overly conservative, given the challenges.
Paul, I have a question on that slide.
Mhm.
The total base levy shows 123,748, but on the two prior ones, it shows 124,819.
Because I don't include the excluded debt.
Oh, okay.
That's why, because that would give a false sense that we could raise revenue, excluded debt, that's dedicated for that purpose, and then it goes away. So when I'm looking at property tax revenue, I'm looking, well, what can we use to fund the operations of the town, not earmarked or excluded? Again, I always put the slide in, it shows you, well, where's your property tax bill go? Because it is 3/4 of the town's budget. It's over 8,564 is the average single-family tax bill right now. Obviously, the most of that goes towards education, 45% of it, or almost $3,900. Benefits insurance, I mentioned earlier, is the second largest, and then your general government operations sort of follow from that. The other thing we notice in the property tax valuation and why the single-family bill goes up, and as does residential, is because the residential values are increasing as our total value of property tax. You can see right now, we're almost at an 85 to 15 split. If you went back to 2018, it was almost an 80-20 split. And that's because residential properties are appreciating faster than commercial. Average single-family property tax bill, again, we show this data, but the one that I like to show, and I know it doesn't ring well with folks, but it's real, is the right-hand column, the rank. Meaning, how does Chelmsford rank with other municipalities across the Commonwealth in terms of average single-family property tax bill? We're actually sliding below the trend. Right now, we'd be 79th based on the data that's for the tax bills that are issued right now. Last year, we were 77th, and if you went back to when I started back in 2007, we were 61st in the state, one being the highest. So obviously Weston being number one, then your Sherburne and your Dovers and Carlisles, and then 351 being, the lowest average single-family property tax bill. We're at 79. So yes, taxes are going up in Chelmsford, and they've gone up. In this case, average single-family property tax bill has gone up 22% or $1,574 in 5 years. But obviously that trend is slightly lagging what's going on elsewhere. And then I give you data for the current property tax in our neighboring communities for the current and prior to fiscal years. You can see that it's roughly proportionate to what's happening in terms of the tax increases. We were higher this year of the group, but yet Barica was higher the year before and so forth. State aid, as I mentioned, 21.45 million. Again, 2/3 of that is Chapter 70 or 14.4 million. 29% is unrestricted general government aid, also known as lottery aid. And then you can see there are other minor components that contribute to that revenue component. The school choice receiving tuition, that's actually earmarked. That goes to the school committee. But it is a revenue. It's called an offset, meaning it's dedicated to the school committee. Same thing for the library. The library aid is offset for the library. And then you've got veterans benefits. So what that means is we actually provided less benefits to veterans because we get reimbursed 75% of what we provide to veterans a year later. So you can see the veterans caseload is diminished slightly to where it was the last couple of years, but nowhere where it was during and then library aid is a minor number. Local receipts, motor vehicle excise is roughly almost half of it. It's 5.9 million of the 12.5 million is motor vehicle excise. Permits, which the other one I highlight is 1.65, is the second largest component. Again, historically, we were at 1.338 a year ago. 1.6, obviously you had the big boom coming out of the pandemic of 3 million. That also was the Thermo Fisher number. The other thing that's going to inflate this number for this year is when the UMass West Campus number comes in, that one-time permit number will blow that number out of the water. So it won't be 1.65. It'll be in the twos because, this the permit for a project of that size. Other thing to note is meals tax. That's, continuing to grow. I know it's been talked about increasing it more. We're now taking over $800,000 per year in meals tax. And hotel tax is strong because of the homeless being in the hotels. We're taking in $500,000 per year in hotel tax. Those are the biggies on there. Solar net metering is strong. Again, that will diminish in a couple years when those solar net metering credits phase out. And then available funds, I said these are the miscellaneous items. As I mentioned earlier, most of them are the sewer betterments, which fund the sewer debt service. That's the biggest one, 2.3 million. But again, that's dedicated to the sewer debt. And then there's the offsets that you see for stormwater and sewer enterprise and PEG access. That's basically the benefit components of those enterprise funds that support the benefit costs that are in the town's operating budget.
Paul,
Yeah.
on the previous slide, when you were talking about room and hotel tax,
Mhm.
that's with like our existing hotels that are open.
Yep.
So if, for example, the Radisson is closed right now,
Mm-hmm.
if that reopens, that would bump that number up?
Yeah, we would hope. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope it would go up, and then the other thing is going to
Well,
be.
this doesn't make any assumption.
No,
about-
no, I've not incorporated what may happen
So
since
it's
the Radisson.
only about what's open right now?
They haven't been issued a building, nor have they applied for a building permit.
Okay.
There's some questions that the Community Development Office has in terms of their zoning, in terms of parking, because remember, they want to break the Holiday Inn Express separate from the Radisson as separate parcels. Right now, they're one parcel, but you've got parking concerns. If you separate the two lots, what's the parking for the Holiday Inn Express? What's the parking for the new hotel that's going to be renovated where the Radisson was? And then also, he talked about doing adult daycare. Well, what's the parking for that? That hasn't been ironed out, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But no, that hasn't been incorporated.
It's
So
the
it'd be
year,
interesting to
is the
see.
year that hotel closed down in this chart, what fiscal year did that?
I
Remember?
think it was FY '20. You can see how it dropped from
Okay,
530
yeah.
down to 400, less than
Yeah.
$400,000.
Okay, thank
So
you.
you can probably estimate that was probably providing over $100,000 of tax revenue to the town. Who knows? We'll see. Available funds, again, I talked about inflation, again, the big anomaly and what's distorted everything was 2022, where we had 7% inflation. We're hopeful that inflation has been tamed. We'll see. I know there's already calls about the Fed lowering interest rates in March, it'd be interesting to see what happens. We're sort of, it's very challenging. So that sort of summarizes the operating budget. I'm going to ask John Souza to come up and sit adjacent to me and review the capital. Just grab one of those microphones, John, and present the capital plan. If you want to advance the slide yourself, or if you want me to do it, it's up to you, John. If you're most comfortable
Thank
with
you.
it.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Select Board members, Town Manager Cohen. Tonight, I'd like to provide you with a overview of our proposed fiscal year 25 capital plan. As the Town Manager described earlier in his presentation, it was a very difficult year for the Capital Planning Committee. The committee reviewed 41 projects totaling just over $11.2 million. And after consideration, the committee voted to recommend 21 projects totaling just over $5.88 million. 3 of those received partial funding. And as he said earlier, 2 larger school roof projects were recommended for funding outside of the capital plan. This slide, I know you've probably seen at the tri-board meeting, just for residents that may not have had a chance to attend, just to explain this. So this shows the capital plan broken out by functional area, and you can see that all the municipal administration and community services projects, those total just under about 18% of the plan. Public safety, police and fire, with the fire engine, those 2 categories account for about 21%. Public works and the cemetery division account for about 19%. And then the largest is, in terms of percentage, would be the school buildings, as you would expect. The capital projects for that category total about 41%. So the next slide shows you, oops.
You can do it that way, too.
The next slide shows you the financing summary of the $5.883 million. We have 2 other financing sources that will help defray the amount that we need to borrow. So they total about just over $148,000. We have recaptured funds, which you probably remember from these are prior year completed projects that the town accountant has worked with department heads and identified that the projects are completed, and these are remaining balances. This year we have a contribution from the Chelmsford schools from their child care fund of $65,000, and that money is going to defray a portion of the Westlands school boiler replacement that I'll talk about earlier. And then Next, we'll take a look at the projects in a little more in depth. So the first one is under municipal technology. What we need to do is an upgrade of all our core switches. The current switches are about 6 years old, and as many of you know, switches are sort of the hub of our municipal network. So that is a cost of $100,000. The next project involves the town clerk's office because as you know, the town clerk's been leading an effort over multiple years to better manage and store the records that are contained here at 50 Billerica Road. This project, with a cost of $60,000, is really phase one of an effort to digitize the building department records. One of the reasons for this is, as you know, older building, we have physical space limitations. The building department has so many paper records and plans, and by digitizing this would allow us to make better use of the space we have. It will also improve organization and retrieval. So if somebody comes into the building department and wants to look up records, it's much easier to pull them up digitally than, be looking through files and boxes of paper records. I should say the total request, the original request was for $120,000. The committee felt this would allow the project to kick off in phase one, but additional phases will be required. The next project involves the senior center, and this involves a replacement of damaged flooring for a cost of $50,000. This is another project where this is phase one, and this will allow public works facilities to really target the work, the areas in the building that are in the most need. The original request was $205,000. So the expectation is that after the most critical areas are fixed, at some point in the future, phase two will take place because the flooring is over 30 years old. The next project also involves the senior center. This is a replacement of the elevator, and at a cost of $325,000. As you can see on the slide, the current elevator is 31 years old. It's reached the end of its useful life. Replacement parts are difficult to obtain. And as the committee looked at this, one of the things we noted was that there's only one elevator, as you know, in the senior center, so this provides the only ADA access to the basement level, to those rooms on that level for programs and other functions. The next project involves Adams Library. This is the replacement of the HVAC system. This is phase one of two, as the town manager mentioned. Many of us think of the library as a very modern building, but when you think back, this system was installed when the major expansion and construction project was done around a little after that, and the current system was involved in 2000. Unfortunately, it's past its expected useful life. There have been frequent equipment failures and repairs, and we just noted that the library has a large amount of visitors annually, and also serves as an emergency heating and cooling center. So the expectation is that once the project is underway in '25, the next year phase two would take place. The cost estimate provided to the committee was about $900,000 in total. The next project involves the health department, and this is a staff vehicle replacement. The current vehicle is used by inspections personnel, and you can see it's an older Ford Fusion hybrid. The mileage is getting up there, but what made it not repairable anymore is it has, unfortunately, from being used in New England, it has extensive underbody corrosion, and so it will definitely not meet state vehicle standards and safety standards next when it's up for reinspection. So then we move into the public safety area. So this first project involves HVAC equipment being replaced in the firearms range building used by the police department at a cost of $150,000. It's going to replace an air handler and also an exhaust recovery unit. The next project also involves the police department. This is a replacement of parking lot lighting fixtures and poles that you see for the cost of $60,000. A similar story here. Many of us sometimes think of the police station as being a very modern facility, and it is. But it's been because it's been in existence for at least 20-something years. The light poles have extensive corrosion, and they reach the end of their useful life. Those must be replaced. And then also under public safety, the fire department's going to be replacing engine number 5. And you can see it is a significant cost with the cost of fire apparatus now. This is going to be replacing a 2009 Smeal International engine. You can see at the mileage and the hours that the current unit's been in service. And the fire chief discussed how the engine currently in service will then become a reserve engine. And one of the things that the fire chief has discussed at capital planning meetings for a few years now, and it's becoming even more critical, is this is specialized equipment. It's not something you could just go to a vehicle dealership and just buy off the shelf. And it requires significant production lead time. And many times now, equipment dealers want municipalities to sign a purchase order and agreement before they will even start procuring the equipment and start to build the truck. So it can take at least, I would say, about 2 years plus from the time that this is started till it's delivered. So that's the reason that time is of the essence on this. Then we transition on to public works. So the first 2 projects are what you consider traditional infrastructure type of projects, sidewalk improvements at a cost of $350,000, also roadway improvements at a cost of $425,000. As we've heard from Director Clancy, these projects will be guided using the sidewalk assessment and also the pavement management assessment survey. So that will help guide the decisions on where the sidewalk repairs and roadway repairs will take place. The next project involves the replacement of the Public Works maintenance garage roof, and this is at the older building at 54 Richardson Road. The cost on this is $150,000, and you can see from this slide the current roof is 31 years old. It's beyond its useful life. It is leaking. This building is used to provide vehicle storage for Chelmsford Telemedia and also some other uses for the highway division. The next public works project involves a replacement of a medium-duty patch or pothole repair truck at a cost of $105,000. You can see that the current truck in service is an older 2010 model. The mileage is getting up there and mechanical issues and corrosion. The next project involves the cemetery department. This is a replacement of a 1-ton dump truck at a cost of $82,500. The committee noted that the department needs this to haul bulk materials to 6 cemeteries, and they also assist our DPW with snow plowing operations during the winter. Then we move to municipal facilities. This project replaces a plumbing van at a cost of $85,000. So the plan here is to replace an older 2010 van with a 3/4-ton pickup that's equipped for snow plowing. And the reason for that is it's going to provide Public Works with a greater versatility and assistance. So I know everyone is familiar with some of the problems that many towns have encountered getting contract snowplow operators during the wintertime. So by transitioning from a van that's not able to be used for plowing, this will provide the department, municipal facilities, or another employee could use the pickup truck to assist the highway during snow removal. And you can see the van has definitely seen better days with the kind of mileage that it has on it, of 163,000. So from here, we transition over to school facilities. So this first project involves a partial roof replacement of the school administration building at 230 North Road at a cost of $105,000. And you know, if you've ever visited that building, there are really two parts to it. There's the older part out front that was the town's former police station. And then in the back, there's a modular unit where the school committee meeting room is and the executive level administration. And the roof that's being replaced is over the modular unit. And it's beyond repair. The next school facilities project involves the replacement of 2 boilers at the Westlands Community Ed Center at a cost of $325,000. As it's noted on the slide, both boilers are 21 years old and they've exceeded their useful life. Director Clancy noted they've required frequent repairs during the past winter season and also during this season. Next project involves ceiling tile replacement at the South Row School, and the cost is just over $958,000. And this will replace ceiling tiles throughout the building with the exception of the restrooms. You can see a photo there. And I just wanted to explain the tiles that were installed in this school many decades ago are different than what you would see like in a building like we're in tonight. You have a suspended ceiling with a metal frame, the acoustic panels. These are a little different. They're actually firmly attached to the material in the ceiling above it. So the issue now is that the tiles have worn out. They're several decades old. The fasteners are wearing out. So this is really to eliminate potential safety hazard with tiles becoming loose and then falling. Next is a elevator replacement at the McCarthy Middle School at a cost of $325,000. So the existing elevator is 34 years old, and as facilities described, many of the parts are no longer manufactured, and this is the only elevator that serves that school. And a second project for McCarthy is the renovation of the front entryway area at a cost of $450,000. The reason for this, if you look at this picture, you know, when we think back, McCarthy was built in a completely different era in the late 1950s, and you really didn't have to worry about when they constructed it. You'll see that the front entryway there is just wide open, and you know, as I said, a different area. You didn't have a lot of the same school safety concerns we have now. So this is actually a top priority of the school committee on this year's capital plan. And what this will allow them to do is provide more secure access. There'll be a containment area will be constructed. A sort of a security screening checkpoint area will be able to be implemented, similar to what they have at the high school. And it will just provide administration with, you know, better control over who's entering the building and modernize that area. Another project at McCarthy Middle School is the design of the roof replacement. So the current roof is about 22 years old. This is an area of about 36,000 square feet. The total cost of this project was about $1.2 million. It's not MSBA eligible, and so when we were struggling to, you know, decide what we could fund, what we could not, one of the ideas that Director Clancy proposed is it would make sense to fund the design work so that this way we can go into the project having all the specs that will allow them to bid the project with all the details that they need and will provide some planning. So just wanted to explain, this will definitely not fund the total replacement of the roof there, but it will get facilities and DPW off to a good start. And it also notes that you have, it also will include costs for removing and resetting solar panels that are on the roof.
The reason it's not MSBA eligible is the MSBA standards right now is they won't even consider a project that a roof is less than 25 years old because of the backlog they have. So we have that, as I mentioned earlier, at South Row School, where we're going to do a partial roof replacement. The examination, and those roofs get examined annually. The roof at McCarthy won't last till 25 plus years, and that's assuming you got it funded the first time you were eligible. So that's why we're proceeding at this point in time. with this project.
And then just, so that concludes all of the projects, so just as a reminder, so from here, the next step would be to bring these projects to town meeting for town meeting consideration, and then assuming that they're approved, we would then work on financing these in June after town meeting is concluded. And then this is just a table showing all the projects. That concludes the fiscal year '25 proposed capital plan.
And that concludes our presentation this evening. So again, there's
Any
a lot there.
Any questions for Paul or John?
Yeah. And like I said, we'll be meeting with the finance committee in February into March. And then they'll wrap up probably beginning of April, and then we'll come back to the select board that's constituted, in April after the election. Fortunately, with town meeting being the 29th, an extra Monday in April this year, it's always the last Monday in April, it will give the select board an extra week in April and a little more time to consider the warrant and articles and budget at that time.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Sorry, can I just go back to like page 16-ish? I'm just curious, the community services budget
Yep.
took a big jump. What's behind, is there something specific behind that? I assume there's,
Community service, that's the CCA.
oh, that's all, okay. it's
Yeah,
all-
CCA falls under community services.
Uh-huh,
That's
got
why
it.
you see that big jump,
Yeah.
is because
Okay.
we placed it in there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else?
Right, thank you.
You ready, George?
It's 7:31, George.
Make a move to adjourn.
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.